Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another teaching session here. My name is Stacy. For those of you that are just joining and don't know myself, today what we're going to be talking about and is evacuation planning. Like in the previous videos, we've kind of got a scaled up approach of what an emergency management coordinator, when they're first starting the work on their emergency management plan, to start looking at the risk assessments and everything like that. Now we're going to start getting into what your emergency management plan would look like. And then one of the biggest things for any community, whether it be First Nations or off reserve, is an evacuation plan. For the First Nations, Canada's done a study, and the stats show that First Nations are one of the top communities that have been evacuated multiple times. And that's a little disturbing. And also too, it should bring a heightened awareness of making sure that your evacuation plan is solid, that you know where you're going, how your team is set up, all of those considerations when you're evacuation planning. Okay, so you're the EM coordinator, you're looking at evacuation planning. There are a lot of considerations when you start to put the plan together for an evacuation in your community. One, like I said previously, is find out how an evacuation went in the community from a previous event. How you can do that is make sure that you cover all of the different community members within your nation. So, administration. What was it like for the administration to have to evacuate, their business continuity, all of that stuff? Chief and council. Then go to the community, start asking the people, when you were evacuated, what was it that was good? What was it that was bad? Did you feel supported? Talk to the elders. Because when we evacuate our elders, we have to make sure we take care of them. So that's the beginning part, to see what was good and what was bad. Then you can start getting a benchmark of where you need to improve on your planning or prepare for the what if because of the previous evacuations. That's the first start. Second part is, now you've seen what you need to improve on. You're starting your evacuation. Now start looking at what does it look like to evacuate your community. I always recommend is this. You want to make sure that mapping of your community. What that means is a lot of things. One is the roads. Houses. And vulnerables. In the community. Within this mapping, when you start looking at your evacuation planning, so we'll start with the mapping of your community. We talk about the roads. So now you're giving out a message to the community. If you know all the egress routes for your community, you will have a better idea when you send out your messaging of telling whether you've got different little communities within your nation or one area that everyone is where the housing is what roads are they going to take to make sure that they get out of the community safely and to the location that you want them to evacuate to. Also, too, in some cases, some of the northern communities, there's one road in, one road out. So you have to consider that when you start looking at evacuating individuals. Also, too, is if you really want to get technical, is what do you think If you have 1,500 people within your community, how long is it going to take your community to 1,500 people in your community to evacuate? What I mean by that is you can go to your public works. When I was at a different nation, they're building new infrastructure, new buildings, and they're building a new road. And talking to the engineer, and I asked him, how many people can we evacuate on that road? Because there's roughly 800 people. An engineer has got it dialed in that that road will be able to flow 900 people an hour. So that's another consideration that you might have, is that, well, you need to use multiple roads to get people to the location and give them options. Because sometimes, well, a lot of the time, when people are evacuating, they don't realize that what road they're going to take, and you get people scattered all over the place. So if you give them a specific road to go to and to get to the community, that's the road that they're going to take, because they're in that fight or flight mode and they're just going to head to that. So it's a good way of knowing which roads to take. The other one is, how many houses are in your community? So do you have clumps of communities, which will lead back to the roads of how many people are you going to have to evacuate from? Also, too, is how many vulnerables are in your community when you start looking at the mapping. So in mapping, you would actually you can go to your health services, you can go to your membership department. Health services will have a list of all of the special medical needs in your community, whether it be they're on oxygen, they're wheelchair bound, if they need a special vehicles to transport them. That will give you an idea, because then you can start looking at, okay, if there is an evacuation warning or a mandatory evacuation, you know that it's going to take more time to get those vulnerables out of the community, and you want to give them an opportunity to get out first. Because if it's medical needs, they might have a short transport time that you have to get them to another medical facility or anything like that. So when you map out the amount of vulnerables, where they are in the community, that starts to now fuel how your evacuation is going to look like. Also, too, within the mapping is trigger points. What I mean by trigger points is, if you live in a forest protection area and there's a wildfire that's near your community, you will know from the distance of where the wildfire is. A trigger point is a time of when the fire, where it's at now, to the potential of it coming to your community. And so when you have those trigger points, you know that if it's a certain distance, you've got 30 minutes to evacuate, or you've got an hour to evacuate. And as the trigger points get smaller, obviously the evacuation time is going to be a lot less. Also, too, if you reach the point where not everyone's evacuated, that trigger point starts to get smaller and smaller in terms of time, you can start looking at alternatives that the people can't get out of your community safely. In your evacuation plan, they may have to go somewhere that's a safe area where they can just be out of the way of wildfire or any hazard that's happening within the community. Also, too, within your mapping, you can start looking at infrastructure. That's going to be a key thing, too. What I mean by that is, when you start looking at these trigger points and things coming together, is if you're going to evacuate to your local facility, which I'll get to in a minute, what are the issues that may happen if the trigger point is there, it starts getting towards an area that you're evacuating to, could cause power outage, could cause any of that. So first step, map your community, get familiar with your community, what you're going to be dealing with, where they're going to be going to, the housing, vulnerables, all of that. That's a good start, which will start leading into the next thing we're going to talk about. And that's your resources. When we talk about resources within your community, so we look at the vulnerable portion of your community. When you make your plan, you want to make sure that your plan will reflect the resources that you have available in your community. So if there's a lot of vulnerables that are wheelchair bound or special needs or anything, do you have enough specialty vehicles that can accommodate all of those vulnerable people, get them um, out of the hazard zone and evacuate out into the community. Also, too, is the resources are, do you have enough drivers? And I mean registered drivers, class 2, class 4, whatever it is that you need to transport those vehicles. So I'll put here in community resources. Okay. So if you're looking at the resources in your community, so we're talking about the vulnerables and talking about special vehicles. Now, if you can't accommodate everyone that's vulnerable and to get them, you start looking outside your community. So when you start looking at that, you start going and looking at procurement, way of renting a van, talking to the local town, local cities that you have near your community, First Nations community, to see what's available and see how quickly you can access those extra vehicles or any of the resources inside that are in a city or a small town. Just remember, always consider this. If you don't have enough resource in the community and you need to go to the outside of the community, is the community that you're requesting resources from, are they going through the same emergency as you are? A lot of the time they don't consider that. So if other people are needing that rentals, then you're going to be competing with them. So always have a backup plan for a different area where you can get these vehicles, or start looking at agreements within a procurement agreement within some of the places that you can rent equipment from. When we start looking at resources, we need to also look at team members. So what I mean by that is team members that are going to be helping in the evacuation. Do you have enough manpower to give messaging, to make sure that that they're going to be at the evacuation center, that if they need drivers, all that stuff. You need to make sure that you have team members that have the proper licensing. They're part of the team. They understand the evacuation plan. And, you're not having to scramble and get drivers all the time. Sometimes when you rent from a place that needs a special license, they may provide a driver for you. So make sure you ask that. They may be able to help you that way. The other resources that we're going to talk about is buildings. In community and outside. So when you're evacuating people, so depending on the nation, what can happen is, I know some areas have a sportsplex that's got a hockey arena along with a gymnasium. That's a good start, because if you have the capabilities of evacuating your nation members to a community building that's within your community, that will be a lot helpful. They'll be more relaxed. They'll know that they're still in the community. However, the building, you have to want to make sure that they have, if you're going to evacuate them to sportsplex, that there's enough room to accommodate them. There's enough washrooms for the amount of people that are going to be evacuating to the building that you're thinking of, and also to possibly shower facilities. And the other thing too is storage. Because if you think about the buildings and everything everyone's evacuated to, you're going to be looking, I'll get to it in a second here, logistics. If you have to start bringing water and logistics and support for those people that are evacuated, you're going to need to store it somewhere. And if the buildings are already at capacity, you might not need to bring something else, sea can or whatever you need to do. Also, too, within those buildings, look at which buildings have industrial kitchens. that you can actually cook for the evacuees right there. Could be a school, gymnasium, sportsplex, whatever you need. So those are the resources that you need to look at and have a plan A, where they're going to evacuate to, and a plan B. The plan B is outside your community. So if you look at the buildings that are in the local towns, in the local area, cities, where can you evacuate the nation members to? So if there's a conference center that you can do, if there's another school that you'd be able to utilize, start creating those relationships and those stakeholder relationships where you can start looking at a mutual aid agreement, an MOU, that if you are evacuated, this is where you can go, and they know what's expected. So that's another big thing that you need to consider for resources. Now, again, there's more to it than that. We'll get more into detail as we progress in these lessons, because just resource accountability and what you're going to need is going to be a lot more. Same with roads and mapping is going to be more. Now you're going to look at now you're looking at too is what does it look like in your plan for your emergency management team, specifically your evacuation team. And what I mean by that is, for some plans that I've helped develop myself, is that you have a separate evacuation team. So what they will do, if you issued an evacuation, and it could be a building within your community, the evacuation team needs to be activated. And how you break that down is you're going to need these specific teams is setup, a registration team, logistics, and that's a start. So within your team, you've got to divide it up into your reception center, evacuation team. They're evacuating, people know where they're going. You need to send your team ahead of them. You need to have a team that's going to be setting up the evacuation center, setting up cots, setting up a registration area, setting up all of those things that are needed to welcome the people into the evacuation center. And that goes too if you're going to an outside facility. I always recommend, and it's always very beneficial, if you're evacuating to an outside community, yes, there are agencies that will assist, Red Cross and you name it, that are out there. However, you need to make sure, because you'll get better feedback from your community when they're going and it's their own nation members that are greeting them. They can talk a lot of things. In your team, the registration team, you need to speak. If you can have people that speak the language, Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, that's very important, because that communication barrier might be there. Always bring your own registration forms, however you want to register them, to keep track of them. So you need to set up a registration team. They just basically, their job is to make sure that they track all the registered evacuees, because you're going to have a fluctuation of registries leaving, coming back. They might be evacuating to other areas. During the 2013 flood, we back on Siksika Nation, we had primarily the sportsplex as the evacuation center. However, we did support and understood that some of the nation members, they may not want to go to the sportsplex or to an evacuation center. They will actually call their own family and stay at the homes. So we have a registration team. Not only are they registering the evacuees, but they're going to register if evacuees are staying at a family's house. And what that leads to is that you still need to support those evacuees that are staying at families' homes. And what I mean by that is, when you start getting to the logistics and setting up everything, is you can send food to help that family that's supporting evacuation members to their homes. Because that can be a challenge also too, is not enough groceries or the capabilities of feeding everybody. Because you go from a home of 5, you may go to a home, there might be 10 people in the home. That's a lot of feeding, it's a lot of groceries, and depending on the age of the kids, right? The registration team will make sure they track all of that stuff and always update the emergency management coordinator. Then we get into the logistics team. The logistics team are the people that are going to be constantly looking at the resources that they need to order and to get to support the needs of the evacuation center. Cots, food, basic supplies. You start looking at too within logistics an organized approach, because I've seen sometimes too, they make a request for donations, which is great. People want to help. What ends up happening is you get a huge dump of different types of donations. And a lot of the stuff you might not even be able to use. So the logistics team can put out the communication of, and this is going through the registration and the setup team and having the planning process of that messaging going to the people that want to support and bring in donations. The logistics team can be specific. If they need diapers, maybe it's newborn, maybe it's 2-year-old, whatever the case, they can specifically ask for those donations. Types of clothing, whether it be men, women, children, infants, you name it. It's a good organized approach to get and maximize the best donations from the community. Otherwise, what ends up happening is you get, like what happened in some of the places I've been, just garbage bags and boxes full of donations. And now you're having to set up another team just to go through all of the donations and organize that. And that takes a lot of resources just to do that. So the logistics team will start, you looking at that, you look at the plan of what that looks like to order and to get stuff within the community to the evacuation center. Also too, is that if you're evacuating outside of your community, what does the logistics look like there? Sometimes we had to consider this. So if you evacuate the community and they still need transportation, so you look at people that maybe don't have vehicles. Part of the logistics is actually getting and renting a bus that takes people, because their lives will continue even though they're evacuated. Appointments, doctor's appointments, anything like that. Logistics will bring in buses to make sure that they still go to those appointments, or use transportation just to transport people to different areas. The good thing too is within the registration logistics, then you start to develop out of these little steps, depending on the duration that they're being evacuated to, the vehicles that you may use, the facilities, is just to get mainly children, families, a place to go that's away from the evacuation center, a swimming pool, could be a park, it could be anything like that, just to get them mentally away from being evacuated and being displaced from their home, and give them that time of being joyful, being in somewhere else, and then it's going to help with their mental status. Also too, within the evacuation team and logistics is the big one that I always say is mental health. It's going to be very, very important. Within your planning, establish, if you have a health services within your community, establish a team dedicated during an evacuation to be at the reception center or talk to Alberta Health Services. Now, I want to be very specific. I've been to a lot of evacuation places where natives have been evacuated, even other nation members combined, or you name it. They say they do provide mental health, but the agencies that come and assist, they just come in, stop by. Hey, how you doing? Can we help? Everyone may be too afraid to say something or anything like that. They don't create a safe space for them, and then they leave. I always recommend that you have an area that the mental health team can be there 24/7 until the people get back into the community. On top of that too, if you have a mental health team there, within the evacuation planning, you have to look at re-entry. And the one thing that's going to happen is dealing with the mental health of being displaced and being brought back into the community. There's going to be a lot of trauma. There's going to be a lot of, so you need to have a good plan of how to bridge them from being evacuees into being back to getting to a new normal. So good health team is going to be very, very important. Within all of this, so this is the basics of what is going to be considered within your evacuation plan. Also, too, with all of this here is, I know we have a registration team. I just want to add one last thing before we sign off here, is finance. We're going to talk about later on in these emergency management videos is finance is very important. You should have a finance team that's overall for the entire event, and then have a branch off to the different areas. And you can have just two. One finance team for the event and incident you're dealing with, and one finance team specifically for evacuations. All of the procurement, all the bills, everything for the evacuation center will go to that finance team. So you're not overwhelming the finance team that's looking at all of the financial things that are happening within the emergency. Because of the fact of how important finance is within an emergency for First Nations, if you have a good tracking team of finance people, your reimbursements are going to be a lot quicker and a lot easier. And you can start looking at even submitting financial reimbursement during the event. So you can kind of keep replenishing your coffers so you can keep providing good services rather than overtaxing your entire budget and then waiting to be reimbursed, which can be very, very impactful for your community in terms of your day-to-day operations. All right. This is a lot to think about. This is a lot to look at your plan, but this is a start. That's what I'm trying to do here, is get the wheels going in terms of your evacuation plan. Again, my name's Stacy, we're with Hazardscape. We're going to have more specific videos. Reach out to us. If you have any questions on this, more specifics, we can answer them. We can set up a Zoom. We can do it. We can help you through this process. And in future videos, I will dig into this even more to lay out a better roadmap of how you can do mapping, what an EOC, EC reception center is going to look like, and everything that comes within your team and how to train them. Okay, again, thank you very much. Have a great day.